grade 1, I can remember being kept in school, police having cordoned off areas.
But
the PQ got in, and I think it was a shock.
High school, of course, we got into high school, you certainly became more aware of the political situation.
If I was going to make a go at it and have a profession, then it was going to be even twice as hard to do it if I stayed in Montreal.
Will you stay or will you leave? And every time we say farewell to another friend we grieve. As one by one we become a scattered family from our little island, surrounded by a sea.
We had lots of families with lots of kids, and we knew everyone on our street. We went to an all-English school. Everyone we knew was English. We had Italians, we had Greeks, we had everything else in our school, but we didn't have French.
Growing up on 51st, it was pretty much 99.9% an English-speaking neighborhood. And that could be said for most of Western Lachine.
It was a lot like many of the other streets in Lachine, you know, just rows and rows of duplexes or apartments or small houses, and everyone on that street spoke English.
There was great things. I mean, we used to take the bus down to the Forum and down to Atwater Station to hang out, just to see the people going by and people watch and eat pogos at this really greasy pogo stand.
It was an English-speaking community, and that was it. You know, when I was 16, I got a job at McDonald's, and I needed to know French for that job, supposedly. But I mean, all you had to know was the Big Mac gross frit kind of thing, and that was it. So
I was probably, I'd like to say 15 years old when a French-speaking family first moved on to 51st.
We don't know them. We didn't know them, but we knew they were French because it spread through the neighborhood that we had a French family on our street.
So we were aware that the differences were there. But honestly, I don't think we paid that much attention to them.
I think that we were really sort of protected from it to a certain extent growing up.
And then 76 rolled around.
When it happened, it wasn't whether I'd stay or go. It was like, what the heck has happened?
But the PQ got in, and I think it was a shock, to put it mildly, to a lot of people. Whether it was a big enough shock to make them slap a for sale sign on their lawn in the middle of the night and get their brother-in-law's truck and head for the Ontario border, there was probably some of that.
All of a sudden going into stores in downtown Montreal where they wouldn't speak English to you, and that was an eye-opener. That hadn't happened before. And I think that was the beginning of starting to feel like we didn't belong anymore.
I remember the flow of head offices that suddenly decided, you know, Toronto looks a little bit better than Montreal.
See, this is where I didn't notice a change. Maybe I was just too young for that, but I didn't, you know, the French and English, that was never really a factor for me.
It did change, and it was, by the time I left, I remember walking down St. Catherine Street and there were lots of shops boarded up.
Suddenly you started hearing the two words. You would hear out west.
Kevin, that I met through Val, he and I decided we were going to see what was out west.
We started hearing, you know, you hear the old stories, you know, go to Calgary, go to Edmonton. Streets are paved with gold.
The streets were just lined with gold.
You know, Calgary streets were paved with gold.
And whether the streets were paved with gold or not really didn't matter. I think what mattered to a lot of people who went was that they didn't have to bother to learn to speak a language that they really didn't see any point in speaking.
And everyone that we knew had either heard or knew of someone who was coming out to Calgary.
So by that time I'd already predetermined I'd be heading west.
And so we decided we were going to give it a try.
I think it was easier for me to come out west than other people because I'd had that history that I'd been out west before and had relatives.
So they were going out west, and that was sort of a why not?
Calgary, 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 there's oil in my backyard.
So we arrived in Calgary in the spring of '79, and early spring of '79, and we had already actually obtained some employment in Banff for the summer. Val and Karen and I, two of my girlfriends and I, we worked in the Wedgwood shop. Actually, Karen didn't. Val and I worked in the Wedgwood shop on Banff Avenue, one of the retail stores, and Karen and Steve, who eventually became Val's husband, worked at the Banff Springs golf course.
So Karen and Carol and me and Steve, we were all in Banff for the summer.
And then in the fall, we all got a place in Calgary. Kevin and Val and Carol, myself.
Well, I came out with a girlfriend, and we came out by plane, and I got in touch with Carol. I'd been in touch with her before, so I actually lived on her couch for a while.
The first impression I had of Calgary was I'd never seen a boomtown before.
The reception was pretty cool.
I'm not going to say that the reception was universally bad. There were times when you got the look.
What are you doing out here?
And that was also during the time of Ralph Klein going, the Eastern bums can get back on the bus and go home.
We paid our rent in cash because that's what they wanted. We couldn't get a telephone because unless you had an address that you could prove that you had lived at for upwards of a year, I think, you had to give them a cash deposit to get a phone in your home.
So, you know, we kept quiet about where we were from and just didn't make it an issue. So.
Well, this is a letter that I received from my mother in April of 1979, a short while after I'd moved to Calgary with Kevin. And Valerie was still back in Montreal, planning to visit sometime later in the spring. And my mother goes on to say, when I arrived home from work on Friday, there was your letter, tossed on the porch floor with our usual bills. I spotted the yellow envelope right away. Happy to hear you're settled into your place and taking good care of your stomach. Who does the cooking, you or Kevin? How do you like working for a living? Sounds like hard work to me, but I'm glad that you both found jobs. I see your brother strolling across the street. I think he misses you just like the rest of us.
Everybody's asking, will you stay or will you leave?
Calgary's Classic Rock, Q107. I'm Terrry Di Monte along with Peppermint Patty.
I had grown up all my life with the French and the English and the referendums and them asking the same questions over and over and over and over, never getting an answer they liked.
To be perfectly frank, I didn't get along with one person who was running the place. He didn't like me, I didn't like him.
By a sea